Hello, in this video we are going to learn how to name polyatomic compounds. But first we need to know what are polyatomic ions. When we talk about polyatomic ions, we talk about when elements combine together but they still have a charge. So those are called polyatomic ions. If you look at this table that we have commonly used polyatomic ions, and it's your job to be able to memorize each formula and name. So now, what is a polyatomic ion? Let's look at this ammonia. We actually have nitrogen bonded with 4 hydrogens, and then they have a positive charge. So usually when elements combine together, we call them compounds. But this is not a compound since the charges are not balanced. We have a net charge. So this is referred to as a molecule. This is a polyatomic ion, but it's actually a molecule, not a compound. But now, when we talk about a compound, we talk about when elements combine together in a fixed ratio, and therefore the net charge is just 0. So they don't have any ion outside, either positive or negative. They are just neutral when they combine together. And then this is going to be called a compound. So a compound is when we have elements bonding and then they just form a neutral bonding without any charge. But now as soon as we have a charge, that is called a polyatomic ion. So this means this polyatomic ion, it can actually bond with other elements to form compounds. And hence in this video, we are going to learn how to name polyatomic compounds. Let's say, for example, we have the following compound. We have Na2 and we have CO3. So now, how did this compound form? So we know that these two elements here, they actually form a polyatomic ion. So what is the name of that polyatomic ion? If you look at what we have here, we can actually see that the CO3 is actually here. So the CO3 is a carbonate. So now, if you look at the charge of CO3, the charge of CO3 is -2. So, but remember now, when you talk about sodium, sodium is in group number 1. So it has a positive charge of 1. So now, to actually balance the charges, we need 2 sodiums so that we can have a +2 and a -2. So that is why when sodium and this carbonate combine, they form a compound. So now, when we label this compound, we're just going to name it the very same way. We're going to say, okay, the first element that we have, in this case, which is a metal, so it's just going to be a sodium. So we're just going to write sodium. And therefore, the last part is not a non-metal or whatever type of an element. It's just a polyatomic ion. So it has a specific name. So you're going to just put that name as it is. So this is what? This is a carbonate. So the name of the element is sodium carbonate. So that is how you label a polyatomic compound. So now, let us look at the next example. Let's say we want to label the following polyatomic compound. We have potassium, nitrogen, and oxygen. So we need to be aware that this is actually a polyatomic ion. And then what is the charge of that polyatomic ion? If you look at this here, we have a -1. So remember, potassium is in group number 1, so it just have a +1. So this nitrate here is going to have a charge of a -1. So when they combine together, they form this, which is a compound. So now, for us to be able to name this compound, we're just going to say, okay, we have what? We have what you call a potassium. So we're going to start to say we have potassium. And therefore, this last part is a polyatomic ion. So you name it with that name, which is now a nitrate. So this is going to be it's going to be potassium nitrate. Okay, so that is how we actually name polyatomic compounds. For example, we can also have this polyatomic compound. We have ammonium with chlorine. So now, if you look at this here, we have a polyatomic ion as the first element. The reason why we have a polyatomic ion as a first element is because this polyatomic ion, if you can look at the table here, it has a positive charge. So we always start with elements that have a positive ion. And then the chlorine is in group number 7, it has a negative ion. So when they bond together, the charges will be balanced, and therefore this is a compound. But what is the name of this compound? So remember, you're just going to name this as it is. You're going to say, okay, the first part that we have is what? Is an ammonium. So now, when you name the ammonium with the chlorine, we're just going to say we have ammonium. And therefore, the last part, if you look at it, is just a normal element. And remember, when we have the last part as a normal element, it changes to, the ending changes to IDE. So we're going to have ammonium chloride. So that is how we label that type of an element. Okay, so now let's look at one more example, and you can feel free to pause the video and try it. So let's say, for example, we have MgSO4. So now, the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to identify that this is a polyatomic ion. So, but now, what is the charge of this polyatomic ion? We can clearly see that is -2. So that means this polyatomic ion is a -2 charge. And then when you look at the magnesium, magnesium is in group number 2. So magnesium, it has a +2 charge. So therefore, these elements are actually balancing. So you're going to have this as a compound. So, but now how do we label this compound? Remember, the first element, we just write the name as it is. So this is just going to be magnesium. And then the last part, it does not have to change to IDE because this is a polyatomic ion. It has its specific name. So because it's SO4, we're going to write sulfate. So it's going to be magnesium sulfate. So, but now if it was SO3, that was going to be sulfite. You need to be careful of what type of a polyatomic ion you have. That is all that we have in this video. Thank you very much.